worried that you might not make it through the night.
I called shelters. Shelters told you that there were no openings. There were nowhere to go. There was nowhere to go.
It's not too bad, but you have to stay buried under the blankets or you start getting cold.
I can earn my own money. I just return the cans. People throw them away, I take them.
Welcome, Homeless Life Stories.
This winter in Michigan, it isn't just snow that's falling. More than 7,000 households, including roughly 2,000 families with children, are standing right at the edge of losing their homes just as the cold wind comes down. They don't appear on the evening news, but they're sitting in parked cars on friends' couches or in rooms where the keys are about to be taken back. In this video, we're not just going to count the people sleeping on sidewalks. We're going to trace the outlines of an entire system, from pit count numbers that look encouraging on paper, to HUD funding changes that could push thousands of people back onto the streets, from Pod City in Lansing that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, to the kids in Grand Rapids doing homework without knowing where they'll sleep tonight. If you stay with us until the end, you'll come face to face with a hard truth. Homelessness in Michigan doesn't start on the pavement. It starts in unpaid bills, in budget meetings, in decisions made far away from the families shivering in the cold. If you click away halfway through, all you'll see is 8,123 homeless people in a cold northern state. You'll miss the real question: what happens to other cities if we keep calling this normal? This is Homeless Life Stories. If these stories reach you at all, don't just watch and scroll past, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but so the families in Michigan don't disappear one more time into silence. Chapter 1: A State on the Brink. In Michigan, the numbers look neat on paper. The pit count on January 31st, 2024, recorded 8,123 people without a home across the state. A single line in a report, sitting very far away from the sound of wind rattling the car doors where families are trying to sleep in a Walmart parking lot. In Detroit, a city of more than 639,000 people, the number of people sleeping outdoors has doubled from 151 to 305 in less than a decade. It seems small next to an entire city, but if you had to say the name of every person in that county, no one would dare call it small again. Between those official statistics is an almost invisible group. People who are couch surfing, tonight on a friend's sofa, tomorrow in a cousin's basement, families parking in a lot, turning the engine off and breathing quietly to save gas, people slipping into abandoned houses just to get out of the wind cutting through their thin jackets. They are not always counted as unsheltered, but their lives are just as fragile as anyone living in a tent. When social service organizations warn that another 7,000 households, around 2,000 of them with children, are on the brink of losing this winter because of HUD funding changes, the picture comes into focus. This isn't a big city issue. It's an entire state shaking from underneath. Maria in Flint is one of the names hidden behind those numbers. She used to work the morning shift at a small diner, starting her day while the sky was still dark blue. When the restaurant cut staff, her paycheck disappeared before she could find a new job. Rent, electricity, food for her 2 kids, everything slipped out of reach in just a few months. Now part of their life sits in plastic bags in the trunk of the car. The rest is scattered across the cushions of a friend's couch. A friend who has already helped more times than she can afford. When Maria closes her eyes at night, what scares her most isn't the cold, a caseworker tells us. It's the moment her kids look around and finally understand they don't have a home anymore. And to understand why Michigan's greatest fear isn't only playing out on sidewalks, but also inside classrooms, cafeterias, and schoolyards, we have to look directly at the children who spend their days learning in the light and their nights quietly learning how to survive. Chapter 2: Children and Youth on the Edge. In Michigan, children don't show up in the pit count as their own bold column, but their lives are quietly dropped into the coldest boxes of the spreadsheet. In just 1 year, the number of children without stable housing across the state rose from around 312 to 455, the equivalent of nearly an entire elementary school disappearing from the housing map, while still being expected to show up, sit down, and answer roll call every morning as if nothing had changed. In Grand Rapids, a city of nearly 200,000 people often advertised as an ideal place to raise a family, school counselors have started to see the same pattern over and over again. Backpacks are getting bulkier, but the heaviest thing students are carrying isn't inside them. It's a simple question that no one really wants to answer. Where am I going to sleep tonight? When a child does homework under classroom lights by day, then learns to read no overnight parking signs by night, they are not just losing a roof. They are losing the basic sense that they belong anywhere at all. And when an entire generation begins to grow up with a mental list of shelters instead of a list of childhood streets, this is no longer the story of one family. It's a warning to an entire state. This is Homeless Life Stories. If these images remind you of any child you've ever known, don't just watch and scroll on to the next clip. Like the video, share it, leave a comment telling us what you're thinking, and subscribe to the channel so that when we return to Grand Rapids or any other city, these stories still have someone waiting to hear what comes next. Because to understand why kids are carrying both homework and fear about where they'll sleep in the same backpack, we have to go deeper into the brutal math of housing, wages, violence, and the fractures tearing through Michigan's map. That is the story of the next chapter. Chapter 3: Roots of a Broken Map. Michigan's homelessness crisis doesn't start on the sidewalk. It starts at the kitchen table with a rent bill laid next to a pay stub and a silent gap between the two. In Grand Rapids, median rent has climbed more than 7% in a single year, outpacing any raise a full-time worker can realistically hope for. Many families are now paying more than half of their income just to stay housed, and whatever remains has to be carved up for food, medicine, gas, winter clothes for the kids, with no line in the budget left for anything unexpected. 1 week of reduced hours, 1 car breakdown, 1 prescription not covered by insurance, and an entire life can slide right off the edge of that table. At the same time, the state is short more than 190,000 affordable rental units for its lowest income households. Waiting lists for housing vouchers are so long that people joke bitterly what will come first, my name on the list, or my kid's high school graduation. In Lansing and many other communities, mental health care, addiction treatment, and family support services are all running at or above capacity, forcing people already at their limit to stand in line for help while their lives are quietly cracking apart. Aisha in Kalamazoo, left an abusive relationship with nothing but her child and a bag of clothes. I didn't choose the street, she says. I just chose not to get hit anymore. When a state leaves women choosing between being hurt inside a house or shivering in a parking lot, the problem is no longer personal choices. It is a system map drawn wrong from the start. And on that broken map, the next question is simple and brutal. Who falls first when the entire floor begins to split? Chapter 4. WHO falls first when the floor gives way. When the floor of life starts to crack, not everyone falls at the same time. Insogenital older adults are often the first to slip through. They live on fixed pensions with medication costs creeping up every month while rent rises inch by inch. A 72-year-old woman quietly tells a caseworker, "Either I pay rent on time, or I buy my heart medicine. I can't do both." When the weather turns cold, the only option left is sometimes the back seat of an old car parked along the curb behind a church, a makeshift bedroom that doesn't appear on any official report. Just west of Lake Michigan, in Muskegon, James, a middle-aged veteran, sleeps on a park bench with his backpack as a pillow. For years, he believed he could never end up homeless after serving his country. But then came an injury, a disability claim stuck in limbo, a stack of unpaid bills, and his apartment disappeared faster than any medal could save him. The worst part isn't the cold, James says. It's feeling like you don't belong anywhere anymore, like you've been erased from the map. He only started to believe he still existed when an outreach team called him by his name, not by the label homeless. And just as the whole state is struggling to keep people from falling, a new solution appears in the capital. A metal sleeping village built like a row of capsules, glowing on the evening news, but raising hard questions about how Michigan is choosing to respond to this crisis. Chapter 5. POD City in Lansing. In Lansing, among the government buildings where laws are signed every day, a new city is rising, not out of brick and stone, but out of metal shells lined up in rows. People are calling it Pod City, an experimental solution for people experiencing homelessness. Each pod is a small compartment with a bed, a light, and an outlet, just big enough for one person to lie down without getting rained on. In news photos, it looks neat and almost comforting. Clean little cabins, warm yellow lights, officials cutting ribbons, and talking about innovation and compassion. But if you stand outside the fence as evening comes on, the story sounds very different. Winter wind whips across the open lot. Some of the pods are still unfinished with tape on the doors, and just a few blocks away, people sleeping on church steps quietly ask each other, when will it be our turn? Operating costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year make taxpayers wonder, while frontline organizations ask a sharper question: with this much money, how many families could we have kept from losing their homes in the first place? A man waiting to see if his name will make it onto the pod list tells homeless life stories in a low voice. I'll be grateful if I get a spot. But I also know this isn't home. It's just a place that helps the system not have to look at us every night. If these metal capsules are the next chapter in Michigan's homelessness story, then the chapter after that has to answer a harder question. Do they actually open a path back to a normal life, or are they just a tighter way of rearranging suffering so it's easier on the eyes? Chapter 6. Invisible Battles, Queer Resistance in Small Towns. Leaving Lansing with its half-finished rows of pods, the map of Michigan pulls us toward places so small they rarely make the evening news. Ypsilanti, aging neighborhoods in Jackson, faded brick blocks in towns whose names are easier to forget than remember. In Ypsilanti, a city of barely 20,000 people, nearly 1 in 6 residents lives below the poverty line. They still have addresses, they still have keys. But every time they open the mailbox, their chest tightens: rent, electric, gas, medication, a math problem that never balances. One mother tells us we're not sleeping on the street yet, but every month it feels like we're standing closer to the edge of a cliff. People like her don't show up in the pit count. They're not holding cardboard signs at intersections. They still put on uniforms, still smile at their neighbors, but in their heads one question keeps looping: if the landlord raises the rent by $50 next month, is this still our home? Here, churches and volunteer groups cook roughly 500 free meals a week. Those dinners keep people from going hungry, but they can't keep a roof from slipping away. In the afternoons, you see long lines outside the food pantry. No one wears a sign that says homeless, but everyone knows they're just one accident, one ER visit, 1 week without work away from that reality. Michigan has visible encampments in its bigger cities, but the battles that will decide its future are happening in small kitchens in Ypsilanti, where people flip through bills under yellow light, trying to keep their lives from sliding one more step off the edge of the map. Chapter 7: When Technology Touches the Sidewalk. Not every point on Michigan's map is defined only by worry and overdue notices. In Dearborn, a small room is packed not with blueprints for another pod city, but with laptops and coffee cups. Social workers sit next to young programmers, staring at the interface of a new phone app. On the screen, every green dot is a bed available tonight in a church shelter, a county-run temporary space, a mode taking part in an emergency program. When a mother calls the hotline at 10 p.m., staff no longer have to shuffle through binders and voicemail. They open the app, look at the map, and say 2 blocks from you, there's still 1 bed open. In Holland, a research team is using artificial intelligence not to optimize ad clicks, but to predict which neighborhoods are at highest risk of rising homelessness over the next 6 months. Using rent trends, delinquency data, and median income, they're building a kind of weather forecast for crisis, helping local governments decide where to send support before tents go up. On their digital dashboard, red squares slowly appear, not to create panic, but to remind everyone there is still time to pull people back from the brink. On a system full of holes, these projects are like the first stitches in a torn fabric. Small, not nearly enough to mend the whole cloth, but enough to prove that if technology can find an empty bed in the middle of the night, then human beings can also find the courage to say, no one should have to sleep outside on Michigan's soil. Outro. When you turn off this screen, Pod City in Lansing will still be standing there, rows of unfinished metal pods in the cold wind. The numbers in HUD's reports will still be counting down 7,000 households edging closer to the brink. In Grand Rapids, a child will still be lying on a borrowed sofa, trying to memorize homework instead of wondering where they will sleep tomorrow night. In Ypsilanti, a mother will still be stretching 1 pantry dinner into enough for 3 people. Michigan is not the worst story on the world map. But for Maria, for Aisha, for James, this is their whole universe. And in that universe, a single eviction notice can weigh as much as a blizzard. There is a line in scripture: